vezes canta e não sabe quem escreveu a canção, mas fica sempre a mensagem dessas ideias. De onde vem ninguém sabe, a luz da imaginação, a quem pertence a. All right. We are live on Facebook. Good morning, Facebookers. Good morning, everybody. Let's go ahead and get started, shall we? Hold on. All right. It's such a great song. It's Bebel Gilberto and Seu Jorge, Brazilian bossa nova called Novas Ideias. Good morning, everybody. My name is JC, and I'm the Director of Training and Development here at the Metropolitan Parent Center at Synergia. Thank you for being here this morning. Really, one quick note, if we have any Spanish speakers, just bear with me one second. Buenos días, si usted está aquí para la presentación sobre acomodaciones razonables en vivienda en Nueva York, tendremos una presentación exclusivamente en español el jueves a la misma hora, a las 10:30, y estará disponible por medio de Zoom y también por medio de Facebook. Entonces, esta presentación será en inglés exclusivamente. Entonces, la presentación para habla hispana es el jueves, y será grabada, no se preocupe, y estará colocaré el video también en nuestra página Facebook y también en YouTube y nuestro sitio web. Entonces, sí, all right. Thank you so much. I was just saying that we have a Spanish-only presentation, same presentation on Thursday. So if you know anyone that speaks Spanish and wants to see this presentation, we have it on Thursday. Both sessions are being recorded and will be placed on our Facebook page immediately after this and on our YouTube page the next day. So yes, thank you for being here. Just a few words on who we are here at Synergia. Synergia is a multi-service agency located here in Manhattan in East Harlem, actually. And we have been supporting New Yorkers with disabilities and their families for more than 40 years. We offer a rich source of information and training tailored for parents, including parents whose primary language is not English or who they themselves may have special training needs. We help them participate more effectively in their children's education and development, and we partner with professionals like we have here today with our professional Suhali Mendes from the New York Lawyers for the Public Interest, so that we can all help improve the outcomes of all children with disabilities. Synergia, Spanish for Synergy, is one of New York City's 3 federally funded parent centers committed to serving people with disabilities and their families with an added focus on communities of color and the economically disadvantaged. Synergia creates innovative programs ranging from transitional housing for homeless families who have children with disabilities, community residences for adults with developmental disabilities, and parenting and education advocacy training for parents of children with disabilities. Before I introduce my other presenters, I just want to let you know that we are broadcasting this live on Facebook. So hello, everybody on Facebook. Thanks for being here this morning. I want to give a warm welcome out to you. If you have any questions on Facebook, please just put it in the comments section and I'll be happy to relay it back. And that brings me to the point to discuss any housekeeping. So we have received your questions in advance that you did on registration. Thank you. We've gone over those and we'll be sure to cover as much of that as we can. If you have any additional questions, please place them in the chat or in the Q&A section. Either one is fine, honestly. And if we answer your question and it's not sufficiently answered, then please ask it in another way. We want you to be able to leave this presentation with as many answers as you can. If it's something of a more individualized and personal nature, then maybe an intake might be better on Suhali's end or on our end, but please, we want to just save all of our questions to revolve around the process and what we're discussing in the topic today. With that, yes, you will receive a copy today of the presentation of the PowerPoints, and you will receive the link to the recording so that you can view it again. We expect to be here for about an hour, maybe a little over, a little under. But yes, so thank you for being here. Thank you for all the parents who are here trying to learn and know how to navigate this city better, especially in all these crazy, uncertain times that we are all living in, that is COVID and this pandemic and all of these unforeseen situations. It hopefully looks like we're coming out of this, but any extra support we can get to help us get to a better place is always appreciated. Also, one last thank you for our professionals who are here trying to help all of the lives of the children and families that you're working with. Thank you so much for being here. We're really happy to do that. And now I will pass it over to my colleague, Miriam Chartwell, and she is our housing advocate here at Synergia. And she has been with us and been a strong advocate on our center and just really great and supportive. So Miriam, please.
Hi, everyone. Good morning. Thanks so much, JC, for that nice wake-up call with the music. So my name is Miriam. As JC mentions, I'm a housing advocate at Synergia. And what that means is that I help people who have a child or an adult with a disability in the home. And when I say disability, I also mean a person who is OPWDD eligible, right? So that's the New York State Office of People with Developmental Disabilities. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen just so we can talk really briefly about services, and then I'll give it away to Sue Holly. I'll give it away to Sue Holly in a few. Bear with me. Okay. All right. I'm going to do this slideshow view and welcome. So you all know you're here to meet Synergia and Nightly. We talked about the housing advocacy program, and here it is. So we advocate for individuals who are OPWDD eligible within all the boroughs in New York City. We also have a program, or a contract, I should say, that supports people who are non-OPWDD eligible, and that is reserved for Manhattan residents who reside between 96th Street and 126th Street. So it's river to river in Harlem, essentially, because that's where we are based as a community organization. And if you have any questions, there will be intake information at the end of the slide. This way you all know how to reach us. And part of what eligibility requirements are to receive housing advocacy services is you'll need a psychological evaluation and an OPWDD eligibility letter. And for non-OPWDD, you just need to let us know that you're from the community. Part of our services are advocating for repairs. We often work with people who, have some maybe damaged flooring. They have a child with a disability, could be a tripping hazard. We help households be able to advocate for things that they know they want remedied. And that's within their tenants' rights to live in a habitable unit. We also advocate for reasonable accommodations. We work very well with New York Lawyers for the Public Interest. We do referrals there because they have a supervising attorney on staff, and so Holly will get to that as well. We assist with transfer requests. We also let tenants know that there is such a thing as source of income discrimination. And HRA has a great unit, and it's just a call or email away, where if you have a voucher, you can call and report basically a realtor, a broker, or a landlord who says, hey, maybe something really blatant, like we don't accept Section 8. So that in turn is source of income discrimination, because your voucher is your rent money. It is a not necessarily a source of income, but it is something that is keeping you stable. We also do housing court support. We can help you navigate holdover cases, non-payment cases, mostly for households who are in housing court or who might be at risk of it. We help with rental applications, specifically for New York City housing lottery system. So if anybody has heard of Housing Connect, which I'm sure you have, we assist with those applications, creating a profile, letting you know how the eligibility works, and how to do an appeal if you might have been rejected from a specific development. And we also do referrals for free financial counseling. And we also like to show families how they can navigate a database full of subsidized buildings. And that's mainly from HUD, which is the federal department, and it's Housing, Urban, and Development. There's a lot of acronyms here, but we can help you break it down. We also assist with rent freeze programs and just letting you know that you might be eligible for a rent freeze program. And there's a specific set of requirements for that. We also host these webinars, workshops, and we do community collaborations. With that being said, you can feel free to sign up for our monthly webinars and for our newsletters, you just have to visit our website, and the sign-in sheet is there on our website. I can put that in the chat once we're done with this portion of the presentation. And here is our intake information. If you are interested or have any questions about any of the things I just mentioned and you think you're eligible for services, you can feel free to contact our intake department by either calling our number 212-643-2840, extension 325, or emailing us at intake@synergiany.org. And these slides will be shared after the presentation, so feel free to definitely navigate with us. So at this point, I'd like to say thank you on behalf of Synergia, and I want to give it away to Suhali Mendez from New York Lawyers for the Public Interest. So Suhali, feel free to share your screen. You can take over.
Yes.
We'll be glad to see what you have.
Okay. Let's see. Hopefully I'm doing this right. Can you all see this?
Yes, I see it.
Okay, great. So hopefully everyone else can. Hi, everyone. My name is Suhali Mendez. I'm an advocate and New York Lawyer for the Public Interest Disability Justice Program. And today I am going to be presenting on reasonable accommodations specifically and the law. So we will begin. So a little bit about my organization. New York Lawyers for the Public Interest has been around for over 40 years and comprises of several programs within the organization. The first one I'm going to cover is the Disability Justice Program, which is the program that I work in. And that program protects and promotes the civil rights of individuals with disabilities. And part of that program is working in the area of accessible housing, or better known as reasonable accommodations, which is the area that I work on. We provide know your rights trainings in the area of reasonable accommodations. We also provide individual intake screenings to determine assistance, if any, that could be provided. And in addition to referrals, brief advice, representation. And we partner with private firms for pro bono assistance in order to serve more individuals. And that is through the pro bono clearinghouse noted in the screen there. And other programs in our organization is the Environmental Justice Program, which provides organizing and legal assistance to low-income neighborhoods and communities of color. In addition to the Health Justice Program, which works to achieve equal access to healthcare in low-income communities of color, as well as immigrant communities in New York City. So we will continue here. So in terms of housing itself, for accessible housing, there are three major laws that cover the specifics in housing law in terms of accessibility. And those are the Fair Housing Act, the New York State Human Rights Law, and the New York City Human Rights Law. And I'm going to delve into that just in a little bit more detail. So, and also, sorry, let me just make sure here. And also housing, what types of housing is covered is usually a question that we often hear. These laws apply to virtually all private and public housing. That includes the New York City Housing Authority, or commonly known as NYCHA, Section 8, rent stabilized, rent control, co-ops, condominiums, market rate housing, nursing homes, and shelters. Obviously, there are limited exceptions that apply. And who qualifies for what's considered a person with disability? It depends on what law is included in this definition. So I'm just going to go back a moment and go into the Fair Housing New York State Human Rights Law, as well as the New York City Human Rights Law. So the Fair Housing Act is a federal law that protects people from discrimination on rental, as well as purchasing of a home, obtaining a mortgage, seeking assistance on housing-related activities. And that is protected by race, color, national origin, religion, sex, familial status, and disability. These are the classes that are protected under that law. The next law is the New York State Human Rights Law, which prohibits discrimination on the basis of age, race, creed, color, national origin, sexual orientation, military status, sex, marital status, or disability. And that encompasses employment as well as housing, education, credit, and access to public accommodations. And last, but certainly not least, is the New York City Human Rights Law, which prohibits discrimination in employment, housing, public accommodations based on race, color, creed, age, national origin, citizenship status, gender, sexual orientation, disability, marital, as well as partnership status. Another note on the New York City Human Rights Law is that there is a law that prohibits retaliation. This is important to know because a lot of times if individuals, let's say, were to file a complaint against their landlord, there could be possible retaliation. And that law pretty much, while it cannot prevent retaliation from happening, it can definitely state that it is against the law. And I'll delve into that in just a bit. Let's see here, sorry. So again, who qualifies for what's considered for accessible housing is a person with disability. And that depends on the definition. The Fair Housing Act defines this as physical or mental impairment that limits one or more major life activity. The New York City Human Rights Law includes a wider range of disabilities and medical conditions, thus making more people eligible for access. And what are your rights under equal access for accessible housing? It's equal access to use and enjoy dwellings. That includes your individual units or apartments, as well as common and public areas of the building and complex. That includes lobbies, laundry rooms. If your building has like a rooftop access or gym, things of that nature. Those are common areas, and everybody has the right to enjoy those dwellings through reasonable accommodations. And reasonable accommodations covers buildings, services, policies, procedures. And the last point here is landlords usually must bear the expense. This is very important because honestly, for renters, a lot of times, if they're asking for reasonable accommodations, the landlord might say, oh, well, I'm not paying for this, you have to pay for this. And the law highlights that the landlord must bear the expense. It is not on the tenant to bear the expense for a reasonable accommodation. And what is considered reasonable? So obviously, reasonable is a very broad term. So reasonable must cover in cost as well as safety and architectural feasibility. What that means is obviously the cost must be reasonable. It can be like a completely like state-of-the-art device. If there's a device that costs less, that provides the accommodation, that is what could be covered. As well as safety, that could mean, that could also mean under the architectural feasibility. Like, let's say there's a physical barrier that prevents, that must be retrofitted. There has to be experts that has to review the area to ensure that this is in fact feasible, because you don't want to remove, let's say, a beam that might block a area, and it turns out to be a load-bearing area where, you know, the building or sections of the building can collapse due to that. Of course, that's an extreme example, but those are the those are the areas that has to be considered when a reasonable accommodation is being requested. So a little more specific examples of what reasonable accommodations could be requested are listed here. So we have barrier removals, which includes the installation of a ramp to a building entrance or in common areas. Also widening the doors. Sometimes you have buildings that have like a narrow entryway, so that could affect someone, let's say, that uses a device such as a wheelchair, a cane, or other aids to help them be mobile, and that could impair their access to the building, in and out of the building. So that could be a reasonable accommodation that could be requested. In addition to grab bars, and grab bars could be requested in your individual units. Let's say if you have a mobility impairment, you could request grab bars to be installed in, for instance, in your bathrooms and the areas of your toilet or bathtubs or both, in order to be able to utilize those areas as much as possible. Other accommodations are lowering your closet rungs. Let's say again, if you have a mobility impairment where you're in a wheelchair or other disabilities that prevents you from reaching higher, you can request to have the closet rungs lowered to be able to access that. Other things are installation of chairlifts. Let's say if there's an apartment building that has like a walk-up, you could request chairlifts if it's within reason, as well as accessible toilets, which there are ADA compliance. They have to be ADA compliance, hence why it says accessible, as well as showers. Accessible showers can be in the form of a shower that can allow the person to walk into the shower, which, again, if someone uses a wheelchair, it would be harder for them to use a traditional shower. So that's a request for a reasonable accommodation. Others that are quite common are lowering door weights. This is more in the common areas specifically. So usually like the front door of a building can be very heavy, which can prevent someone with a mobility impairment or other impairments to access the door without putting themselves in danger. So that could be requested. Also, the installation of an automatic door opener can be another one, and as well as soundproofing. Those are special circumstances where individuals may have disabilities that affects their sensitivity to sounds, which obviously living in New York City could be that could be a huge issue. So those are areas that you could request reasonable accommodations. And other areas that reasonable accommodations can be provided is in the change of building policies and procedures. And that could be done with, let's say, if your building has parking space access availability and you're requesting for a parking space, you can request this if it's in conjunction to your disability needs, without having to have the traditional lengthy wait list if appropriate, as well as having service animals or emotional support animals. And this is also pinpointing in the area of buildings that have what's called a no pet policy. It's often important to note this because service or emotional support animals are not necessarily pets. They work in the sense of providing support to the individual. So that is completely different from a traditional pet, as well as providing accessible communications from landlords and management company for notices. And that could be in the form of, let's say, if there's an individual who is visually impaired and the building management often communicates in writing to their tenants. A reasonable accommodation could be made in the form of requesting that the information could be emailed to an individual with a vision impairment instead of having it sent to them in writing in order for them to equally access the communications. Other areas could be transferring to a lower floor. You have individuals sometimes that could live in a unit for many years and may become disabled with time. And let's say if they live in a walk-up, for instance, requesting to be moved to a lower floor is a form of reasonable accommodations as well. So discrimination in itself is such a broad term, but in terms of in the area of reasonable accommodations, it is when a landlord or management company explicitly refuses to provide a reasonable accommodation. And that could be done by things like, no, we can't do this because it costs too much money. And, that is an example of an explicit refusal. Failure to respond also corresponds as a refusal. There have been situations where individuals will call us and say, oh, I've been requesting said reasonable accommodation for 3 years, and I've been sending correspondence to my management company for this period of time. And that in itself indicates that the management company has failed to respond, which is an act of discrimination in itself, because they have not provided any reason or any response whatsoever to provide the individual with a reasonable accommodation. In addition to failing to meet design and construction requirements for newer construction buildings. These are specifically newer buildings. They have to be ADA compliance. And if you have newer construction building that do not provide or have ADA compliance, that could be an act of discrimination itself, as well as outright exclusion based on disability and outright exclusion based on source of income. So I know Mariam referenced the source of income, and this is also an act of discrimination, such as, we do not accept Section 8 tenants in this building, or other exclusions based on source of income, as well as disabilities. Examples of that is, we do not rent out to individuals with mobility impairments, or we do not rent out to individuals who are deaf, or fill in the blank. So those are specific examples on discrimination that could that could happen in the real world. So obviously, if those things happen, you have options for how to enforce your rights. And that is, so one of the things you can do is when you realize, hey, I need a reasonable accommodation, a lot of times you have individuals who will pick up the phone and call the landlord, which is great. But if they don't respond within a specific amount of time, or just allege that you never requested that, it is hard to prove. So a lot of times when you call, let's say, my organization, we can definitely ask you, like, when do you request this? How do you request this? And it's often important because as a legal office, we are more interested in the timelines in order to determine how to address and proceed on the matter in itself. So how to request a reasonable accommodation in writing, it does not have to be sophisticated. You can simply request a letter, send a letter, just say, I, John Smith, from apartment 4C, am requesting the reasonable accommodation of a grab bar in my unit, something like to that effect. You could also, to the degree of comfort, include the disability or medical condition that allows you to request this reasonable accommodation. Excuse me. And the more specific to the reasonable accommodation, the better, because a lot of times if you just say, I want a reasonable accommodation, it's such a broad term, and it will increase the likelihood of the landlord not allowing to provide the accommodation or respond to the accommodation. So the more explicit you are to what you need, why you need it, as well as providing documentation from your medical provider confirming your medical needs, condition, or disability, the better. Because a lot of times, if you have more supporting documentation as to why this is necessary, it definitely strengthens your case for requesting said reasonable accommodation. So again, this is just a brief makeup on how your letter to request a reasonable accommodation should look like. What do you need? And I'm going to give the example. I need a ramp in the entrance of the building. Why do you need it? In order to access the building. How would the accommodation you're requesting help you? It will allow me to gain access to get in and out of the building, and then, of course, providing documentation from your doctor if possible. One thing about your doctor's notes, I know with this time, a lot of people are a little less hesitant or more hesitant to go to the doctors. If you're making a reasonable accommodation request, it would be ideal to have a letter dated anywhere from 6 to 12 months in age. The more recent, the better, because a lot of times with disability, that can change. Sometimes a disability can progress or regress, in a sense, like things could get better or worse with time with disability. So the more recent your doctor's letter is to document the need, the better you are at your chances to provide this letter to your landlord, and in hopes that the accommodation is in fact provided to you. So what happens if your request is ignored or denied? You have options at that point to file a complaint with an administrative agency through HUD or the New York City Commission on Human Rights. In addition, you can file a lawsuit through state as well as federal court. Just know, if you do take this route, it is not something that's going to be immediate. As with any process that involves the city or the state, it does take time, and you have to be mindful of the time and the commitment that you must give in order to see this through. So what happens after you file is there will be let's say if you file through the Commission on Human Rights, there will be an investigation. If you do pursue a lawsuit, there will be discovery. If a judge or other decision maker finds discrimination, let's say they realize, hey, all this information provided qualifies as discrimination, they can order a reasonable accommodation or policy modification within building, as well as requiring an anti-discrimination policy, require trainings for landlord and staff, specifically for like disability sensitivity, as well as award monetary damages for emotional or other harm. And each law is different. And one thing, I know we live in an overly litigious society. Not every issue or complaint will grant you monetary damages. These are situations that have to be thoroughly analyzed in order to determine if, in fact, this is the appropriate remedy. A lot of times, the above matters, such as making sure that the reasonable accommodation is provided, as well as policies and trainings, are usually more achievable because, it is more immediate. So what happens if there's retaliation? I mentioned earlier that the New York City Commission on Human Rights law covers retaliation laws. So that doesn't mean that, it won't happen, but there are laws that can protect you against retaliation. An example of retaliation can be, let's say if you request a reasonable accommodation of an installation of a ramp in front of your building, and then your landlord realizes that, somehow, some way you made this request. What can happen is it could be a retaliatory act could be like the building management starts treating you differently, making you feel bad or excluded even more. So those are examples of retaliation. So with that, you definitely have the right to file another complaint alongside of your ongoing case for a retaliation claim. So just know that those are your rights, and you are protected under the law. So what are the recommendations with that? If you or anyone you know may have issues that you identified with during this training on more specific grounds, you could definitely call our office for a more thorough intake screening. We are open our office is open virtually, and our intake hours are from 10 to 3, Monday through Friday. And you have our phone number at 212-244-4664. And again, our services can be full legal representation, brief advice or referrals, as well as self-help materials such as fact sheets and other materials. And as for language access matters, we provide interpreters on the phone or in person as needed. We accept relay calls. So even I know I speak Spanish, and there are other languages available that we will provide assistance on. If, let's say, our in-house staff does not speak the language, we will connect with an interpreter in order to communicate effectively with anyone who is seeking assistance. And we do not consider immigration status when deciding whether or not to help you. So with that, these are other resources that you can look into about fair housing. If this is something that sparks a fire in you and you want to learn more, these are areas that you can look into. So there's Fair Housing Matters New York that will give you more of a hyper-focused reading on housing law within New York City, as well as overview surveys, events, and invitation for updates. And recently there was a Where We Live report that was released by the city that I believe it was in October 2020. So I included the link there so you could get more information on what that looks like in terms of discussing matters on accessible housing. So, and these are other areas that my program specifically helps with. So we promote and protect the rights of New Yorkers with disabilities in the areas of special education, accessoride, OPWDD services, housing, healthcare, communication access that could be spoken, as well as sign language accommodations. And last but not least, nursing home discharge plannings. So with that, I'm done with my presentation, and I'm open to take any questions that folks might have. Just before we delve into questions, I definitely want to emphasize that I am not a lawyer. So I could speak on things very generally. And if you are, let's say if you're asking questions specifically to a more individualized matter, I will definitely have to ask you to call our office for a more thorough intake. While I am not an attorney, I work for a legal organization, and I have to honor confidentiality. So this is not the right place to talk about individual matters. So, I just wanted to share that, but I am open to answer any questions that are appropriate. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much to Holly. I really appreciate it. I know Miriam does as well. On this presentation, it really helps us understand how to navigate it better and understand where the opportunities lie for someone to seek help. So thank you for that. We do have some questions that have come in. Let's see. First, we have Miss Russell Felix here with us via Zoom. What are the steps in securing assistive living housing for a 22-year-old individual with autism?
Okay. Is the individual by any chance connected through OPWDD? Because they can maybe look into getting connection through their case management and inquiring through them. The case manager typically serves as a rich pool of resources in order to connect them to the appropriate resources such as housing or services or such. So I think if the individual is in fact connected through OPWDD, that probably is the best bet. Inquire with your case manager in order to find out more about the process of assisted living.
Okay. So
Yeah.
start there.
Yeah, I can actually add on to that, maybe some terminology that you might be looking for asking. Zuhali is absolutely right. The care coordinator / case manager would be the best person to connect the individual with services. And this is not necessarily a service as more of a residential placement question. So maybe looking into supportive housing, an ISS, which is individualized support services. Those are, OPWDD friendly terminologies. And I think that's where you can find your answer. So I hope that helps.
Yes, and Miss Russell Felix just confirmed that yes, he is connected to OPWDD.
Great. So
okay.
I would definitely implore you to inquire with your case manager, and hopefully you can get the assistance that you need.
She's also asking, are there assigned areas in the city that are available for assistive living for people with disabilities? And if yes, where? Do you know by chance?
I do not. I don't know, Mariam, if you would happen to know.
Yeah, I think this is like a bigger policy question, and it's really one that is presented a lot. I've actually brought it up to HPD at one meeting. The idea is that when you say disability, the interpretation is either you have a mobility impairment, you can't navigate maybe the unit as comfortably, so you might need a more accessible unit. And that usually means wider doorways. That usually means lower cabinets in the kitchen. That might mean, having easier access to maybe the doorbell, or, allowing people and visitors to come in to the building. Like maybe things are just adjusted in such a way where it's easier for a person maybe with a mobility issue to navigate a walk-in tub. People with mobility issues, it's a daily thing, right? You have to maybe follow certain protocols on taking care of yourself. So we can break it down in terms of mobility issue, visual, right? Vision issues, needing a certain unit that is friendly to people who are blind or have other kind of visual issues, and maybe they might need someone to live in with them. Having a live-in aid might be something that they could be eligible for. This way, instead of a 1-bedroom, you can possibly be eligible for a 2-bedroom. Another thing that HPD, at least, and I'm talking about like in terms of Housing Connect and any kind of subsidized building, another category would be, so we did mobility, we did vision, and we can do hearing, right? Yes. So these are all 3 different things. Now, in terms of somebody who has autism or any type of intellectual disability, I think the best framework to keep is what is a medical necessity for this person to thrive, right? Unfortunately, I mean, when you're entering a building, you can always make that request that, yes, you will need a reasonable accommodation, which is that terminology that Suhali has mentioned a lot in this presentation. But what a lot of city agencies or Section 8 or, city FEPs and obviously the building management would want to see is, where is the medical necessity? So I think it's really key that, we kind of tune into, well, what are we looking for in terms of housing for people with developmental and intellectual disabilities? And that's why I say it's a bigger policy question, because this is the structure that is there. And, we can, as a group, as parents have led change throughout history all over the globe. So, I think that what I would be interested in, having a more open conversation, feel free to, give JC just like a quick email. And if we can continue this discussion, that would be great. But I think that's like a bigger topic. And I hope that I, clarified some of that for you.
Thank you, Mariam. Yes, there was one comment that Mariam made. I'm not sure if everyone got to see it, but she wanted to highlight that there are public funds available for structural changes that might need to be made to an apartment. And if you need something like that, to please contact ADAPT Community Network. It's their Doorways to Independence program, or the Mayor's Office for People with Disabilities, the Project Open House Currently, there are no funds available, but an inquiry with them might be helpful. So thank you, Miriam. Miss Sumaya from Facebook is asking, would moving temporarily to another unit or apartment or staying at a hotel be a reasonable accommodation if an area in the home has to be fixed and it's best to stay away from the area being fixed?
Yes, yes, it can. Yes, it can. That is considered a reasonable accommodation. And again, providing a letter detailing the reasonable accommodation, providing documentation why the reasonable accommodation is necessary will help strengthen the reasonable accommodation. So that way, when the accommodation is made, it could be justified. And this is definitely a type of reasonable accommodation for sure.
Okay. Miss Elizabeth Russo on Facebook was asking, my father is a senior and lives in a rent stabilized apartment. There are tenants in the building who are smoking in the building. We have reached out to the super and management, and they have both told us that there is nothing that can be done. Is this true? He is asthmatic and is getting sick over this. I'm so sorry to hear that, Ms. Russo.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really lousy. Sorry, go ahead.
So I've dealt with a case like this, and it can be really tricky if it's not a rent stabilized apartment. I don't see why. I haven't had a particular case where it wasn't a rent stabilized unit, but I think number one, no matter where you're living, is you want to know if your building even has a non-smoking policy. There should be a non-smoking policy, at least in buildings that have more than 6 units. Don't quote me. But there are campaigns. There's one particular campaign, and they actually work in all boroughs, I believe, in New York City, and it's called Smoke Free NYC. So I'll be sure to, I'm actually documenting the questions as well. So I'll be sure to share the resources with JC. And I actually spoke to a community coordinator once, and they can help a building become smoke free. And there are certain bylaws that have to be passed. Again, like, check out the lease, make sure that there is a smoke-free policy in the building. If it's inside the unit, I don't see how that is allowed, to be honest, because if it is troubling a person who has a serious health issue, one thing is also, please get a letter from the doctor saying that that the individual is asthmatic. His condition can worsen. Have there been any symptoms? This is a type of situation where having like a collaboration between the doctor and maybe an advocate, right? Either if you're the child and you're the advocate, or if there is a caseworker that they do work with as a senior. I know since COVID, or even probably in 2000, there are certain hospitals that have really been on top of reaching out to people who have at-risk health conditions, and they try to coordinate them with case managers as well. So I would definitely suggest to get that medical letter. Look into the lease, see what the smoke policy is. If there's a smoke-free policy, that tenant should be getting fined. So what happens is, I don't want to digress too much. Let me know, JC, like, just give me a thumbs up, like, ooh, pause. But essentially what you want to do is management. Every tenant has rights in a building, especially rent stabilized tenant. They're probably the most protected tenants in New York City. So a neighbor who is breaking their lease, let's say, right, must be informed by management that they're in violation of their lease. Being in violation of your lease can be disrupting the comfort of your neighbors. So management can't just throw their hands up in the air and say that we can't do anything about it. But what they need to be doing is creating a paper trail of letting the neighbor know that they must change that behavior, right, that is negatively impacting their neighbor, so that they can eventually take court action if necessary. So everyone, needs to kind of comply with cohabitating within a building. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Miriam. That's a really thorough answer. And I learned something too. So thank you for that. Yes, thank you for the information and your time. Thank you so much, Ms. Lawson Burtz. We really appreciate you being here. Ms. Wanda Yvette Balines is asking, is there a chance for parents that have children with autism to have housing in New York City?
There are definitely, my office does not look for housings, but there are definitely organizations that can help with housing. That again, if the child is connected through OPWDD, I keep referencing that because a lot of times the case manager has a whole wealth of information. So this is something that, again, that could be deferred to the case manager so that they could give you the correct resources on how to go about that process.
All right. All right. Well, if there are any other excuse me, if there are any other questions, please ask away. Now would be the time. While we're waiting for any last questions, I want to remind you that here at Synergia, we have some workshops coming up and they might be of interest to you. On Friday, on Thursday, we'll have the same presentation we're doing today, but in Spanish. So if you know anybody for that, please let them know. And then on Friday, there will be I'll be presenting with YAI over managing emotions of travel training during COVID. So for teens that are learning, how do you manage stress and frustration? How do you identify that? How do you feel appropriately safe in the community? How to understand signage when you get lost? How to overcome that? What are coping mechanisms, and how do you identify strangers, and understanding which interactions can be unsafe, how to navigate those unsafe scenarios. That'll be on Friday. And then next week, my colleague Miriam will be with me and the other department heads of the divisions here at Synergia for a presentation called We Are Here for You. And basically, the Parent Center is always doing trainings and everything, and so are the other departments, but sometimes people forget of the other departments that have, because they're more under the radar. So we want to give you the opportunity to discover that. It'll be a presentation with a general overview of all the services we offer here and how you can access them, not just the Parent Center, but also family support, housing advocacy, rehabilitation and employment services, and specifically for parents with developmental disabilities, our We Are Parents 2 program. It will also include a presentation and overview of how to become OPWDD eligible, the eligibility process, and supporting the role of the case managers. So that'll be on the 15th, next Thursday. Yes, and can I reach out on behalf of my wards regarding tenant issues related to preventing evictions? I believe so. I believe you can contact our intake department. Would that be the appropriate channel, Miriam?
Yes, intake.
Yes, and I will share, in the follow-up email that you'll receive from me today, everybody that attended, you'll receive a copy of the presentation, the link to this recording, and also PowerPoints and the intake information for Synergia and for Suhali's intake.
New York lawyers, sorry, it's okay.
I know, it's such a mouthful.
It's okay, no worries.
Yes, we do have one more question. Ms. Aguirre, thank you for being here. My son has autism and we are in the process of receiving Social Security disability. Will this affect housing? Can I still get housing? It's a great question. Thank you for asking.
Can you repeat that? I'm sorry. It's in the chat, right?
Yes, my son has autism and we are in the process of receiving Social Security disability. Will this affect housing? Can I still get housing?
It depends on what type of housing you're referring to. Are you referring to, applying to Housing Connect, to NYCHA? This to me says, well, housing is usually referred to as the New York City Public Housing Authority, which is NYCHA. It will, if it's a significant amount. So essentially in a building that is subsidized or that is income based, that means that 30% of your income is being paid towards rent. So if your income increases, that 30% will also increase. So it shouldn't be anything that's beyond your means, because technically, according to New York City policy and rhetoric, at least 30% of your income is deemed as affordable. Sometimes it goes up to 40%, 30 to 40%. So I hope that answers your question. But if you're in already in a building that is subsidized, meaning the rent is income based, then it shouldn't increase to your rent shouldn't increase too much. If you are looking to apply or have already applied on Housing Connect, you just will have to, once you get that determination, that confirmation that yes, this person has been receiving SSD, I believe they just mentioned, you just have to update that into the profile. It might boost your income eligibility for some developments.
Okay. Ms. Sumaya was saying, would making 311 complaints help with the process to make buildings smoke-free? What if there's multiple families with children living in the building? I know there's no sign stating no smoking allowed in the building. The landlord is just saying that there's nothing they can do. And Ms.
Yeah,
Russo,
maybe something more proactive than even calling 311 is to contact Smoke Free NYC, because they can work with the landlord slash management on doing doing a consultation about how New York is really trying to go smoke free in terms of residential buildings. Landlords can offer things like air filtration within the unit, but if it's consistent smoking, I haven't seen that as being highly productive. Try 311. I know that 311 will report it to HPD, and an inspector will come in. The only trick with smoke issues is that HPD will come in kind of randomly. They'll usually communicate with management and see if it's being remedied on their ends. If it's not, they'll come in and do an inspection. I would say to just be mindful that it might take a couple of attempts for them to actually detect the smoke in the unit. But I think the best way to maybe like head on approach this is by contacting Smoke Free NYC. And if a transfer is needed, right, to a different floor, it's hard to say if that can actually be a remedy to the situation, because you can never know which neighbor is going to be smoking in their unit. So it's a bit of a challenging situation that you're definitely in. But I definitely urge to contact Smoke for NYC, because they have worked with different boroughs. There is a community coordinator, as I mentioned, throughout the boroughs that have worked with management and property owners to try to make an actual effective smoke-free policy. Some smoke-free policies are very ineffective. They have very low fines, which I don't think a neighbor would mind getting, right? Like $25 fee anytime that there's a complaint made. That's not going to change behavior. So the whole point of this policy, if anyone remembers around the Bloomberg era, there was a lot of like no smoking signs in public areas, especially in front of school entrances, like university entrances. And it took time to make that shift. But, ultimately, I think it's worked in terms of like public areas.
okay.
I hope that helps. But yeah, try 311. I definitely never have an issue with trying 311, and also writing a letter to management, like an official letter, letting them know that there are these concerns and this needs to be remedied, because that, your dad or the senior parent is a rent paying tenant.
Right. Yeah, no, Ms. Russo was just saying 311 calls have been made and there are no signs in the building, but they've been told to speak to the neighbors. Wow.
Maybe starting group tenant action. I think getting a petition from neighbors is one of the most effective ways to really change building policies if it's affecting more than one neighbor.
That's good to know.
And I can send some more info on
So yes.
Yeah, creating a tenant association. You're in a rent stabilized building. I'm pretty sure you might have a tenant association, but it sounds like community collaboration among the tenants will be the most effective way. If you guys are each individually doing it on your own, it's very difficult to affect change.
Ms. Lawson Burtz was asking, as a guardian ad litem, can I reach out regarding my wards that have cases in housing court?
Hi, GAL. Oh, I haven't met one actually. I've been to housing court and I've like always heard, oh, let's assign a GAL. Sorry, I'm getting excited. That is a really good question. When you say ward, are they saying ward like WARD?
Yes.
Can you explain that a bit more? Sorry. Because I know a GAL is usually assigned through APS, Adult Protective Services, if a person is not able to advocate for themselves. And it's really like a great resource. Can they
Ms.
explain?
Lawson, if you want to follow up with some more information on that in the Q&A, please. We have another question from Miss Kim. My son has severe autism. He's 18, and he breaks things such as toilets, faucets, and walls. How do I deal with the landlord without risking lease renewal?
So the main concern is how do they address the concerns they have with the behavior of the son and maybe the destruction that's going on in the apartment?
Yeah, how do they risk, I guess, avoiding lease from the lease not being renewed?
Suhali, I don't know. Have you dealt with any situations like this? I have some thoughts, but
I can't say I have, but yeah, this is a tough one, to be honest. I don't want to speak out of term.
I would say maybe it's more of a easing the landlord potentially by putting in more supports that your child's or the person might need, right? It's really hard to deal with different and address different concerns if a person is on the spectrum. There's different types of characteristics and traits that definitely come out at different times. I mean, even us as individuals, like we have our different days and our different moods. But I would say to maybe if it becomes an issue, just letting the landlord know that, you are trying to actively work on supports to mitigate any possible behavior that could damage the unit. It's a reasonable kind of request, right? That let's things are being damaged. But definitely speak to the care manager and see what additional supports. There's community rehabilitation, there's respite, there's different types of programs that can support you as a parent.
I think that's a great recommendation, and definitely take advantage, because there are, obviously we're all homebound. We're all expressing frustration in varying ways. And I think having that support will help exponentially with some of the behaviors that are being shown.
All right. Well, Miss Lawson Burtz has not followed up since. And Miss Russo from Facebook says, thank you so much. This was very informative and I really appreciate it. So thank you, ladies. All right. Well, we're going to go ahead and conclude this session. So thank you for joining us this morning. I'm going to do a live poll just for a quick survey. It's only 10 questions. Don't worry, it's nothing too elaborate and too complicated. If you just fill that up for us, we'd really appreciate it. And yes, please come back. We'll be here on Friday and again next Thursday if you'd like to learn about the other services. Suhali, thank you so much for being with us this morning. Good luck with your computer.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. And I hope that the information I provided serves as help for anyone out there. So thank you so much for having me.
Oh, no problem. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a great day. And yes, please. End it on a New York note.
Sitting courtside.